All right, so last week we said we didn't know what we were doing today, and that's completely false. We were just like super tired, and at the time we didn't know what to do. So what's going on right now is we're waiting for the contractor to pour our slab. It should hopefully be this week, but what we're going to be talking about in this episode is we're going to be building the entire wall framing for the shed. So let's get into it. So we've been super hard at work. Yesterday we didn't actually get to record any like spoken videos. We got a time lapse maybe of getting the sill plates taken care of. But for the sill plates, what we've done is we have put a conservation energy rubber gasket. This is much better than what you would get for like the foam gasket sill plate for air barrier and insects and whatnot. In addition, we are also putting DAP acoustic sealant. We are using DAP because DAP works well with rubber and wood. We were thinking of using Lexel, but we couldn't find any real good information about rubber and wood, but we were able to find it here. So anyway, we've put all the sill plates. Here you can actually see some of the squeeze out of the acoustic sealant. You can also see the gasket underneath the sill plate. They are all tightened up. So in addition to that, we are hoping to get walls assembled today. If life goes great, it would be 2 walls, but chances are maybe 1 wall. So what we've started doing is we've made holes for the bottom plates, for the hold-downs, and the J-bolts. So let's get to work. We have a lot to do.
So here we are at the end of the day. We have a beautiful sunset going on and we are very happy because finally we have our first wall ever. So this is amazing for us. It's a great achievement. First time something is coming up from the ground. So a few things. We had our first issues. So we realized that the hold-downs, they have very little tolerance for error. So in this case, we're supposed to be 3 LVLs, but because of the position of the hold-down, we had to swap 2 of them for regular 2x6. And on the other side, we actually had to replace all 3 of them with 2x6 because you just need to make the adjustments. What we're realizing is that every single wall is going to have an issue based on the hold-downs, but we'll have to deal with them at some point. So for the LVLs, what you see here, these were the ones that were supposed to go on the corners, but we just use them throughout the walls. So yeah, well, the day is over. We cannot make any more noise because of town regulations, so we're going to just prepare for the next day.
last day of the Labor Day weekend. I haven't taken a shower in like 4 days. Maybe you can tell. I can definitely smell it, unfortunately. So what I'm going to be doing is, if you remember, I dug this trench because it rains a lot once in a while, and it's like a micro flash flooding. It's so strong, it's like tropical storm-like behavior, and there's like pools and whatnot. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be extra protecting the sheathing from the bottom. What's going to be closest to the ground, I'm going to put zip tape along the edges, and this will probably be the last line of defense because we will of course have other kinds of waterproofing after that, but we gotta take every extra measure we can. There are like little paths for water to run around the shed, but you just never know. Last week we left a little bit disappointed because we could not lift this wall, even though we finished it relatively early, like midday Sunday or Monday. We were ready to lift it, and it was just way too heavy. We had a couple of wall jacks. The problem is we only had 10-foot sticks for the wall jack, so that if you do the math for the hypotenuse, that would have been too tight and too dangerous. So another thing is we couldn't lift this wall, not even with my hurricane force. So we actually brought the car jack, as you can see it down there. That helped us sufficiently enough to be able to put the wall jacks. We'll get back to those in a moment, but I want to show you another two things before we move. The first is we are pretty much ready to lift the wall, so these are going to help us brace the wall once it's ready. I put 3 stops along the way. They are probably not very strong, but we are kind of relying on the hold down right here. If you can see over here, we've made a hole for the hold down to go through. So we are kind of relying that the hold down will help us hold the wall forward, and then this will act as backups. If we walk around here, finally we can have a talk about the wall jacks. We actually lifted this wall, but this was a tiny wall, and we were able to lift it without any problems. This is the real big wall, that the real big first wall that we're lifting. So we have these wall jacks. They will help us lift. I will go, and this will like crawl up the stick. This is acting as a stop for the wall jack. We have 3 wall jacks. We probably don't need that many wall jacks, but the key thing here is going to be safety. We don't want any of them to slip or anything, because this is basically a humongous mousetrap. If you are underneath this wall, if it falls, you're pretty much dead like a mouse or a rat even. So we have 3 just in case one of them were to fail. The other 2 can hold the weight. And finally, we haven't done it yet, but we're going to strap this somehow to the wall so that they don't slip, hopefully. So this is a historic moment. Let's get to it.
Our large wall is finally up and standing. We still need to adjust it a little bit. It's a little bit to that side, but it's up and we're happy about it. Now, we ran out of battery when making the time lapse because this thing took 4 hours to get it standing. So there were a few situations. It's a very heavy wall because of those headers. The other thing is we didn't have the right tools. We only have like this, you may see the small stair over there, and we have one that it's a little bit taller. But we had to be moving from one stair to the next because it was so tall that we just couldn't work with that one. It's also a big mousetrap, so we had to be very careful with safety, making sure that everything was in place. So it was a long process, but we finally got it done. And then here we have our next wall. So this one was much easier to get it standing. You will notice it does not have a top plate. And that's on purpose because since it's at an angle, we decided it would be best to put the top plate at the end when we know the exact size. And we got this locking that would be acting as the top plate to make sure everything stays in place. But here's the thing, if you have heard that phrase of measure twice, cut once, well, we measured once and we cut 8 times. And turns out that we were 1 inch shorter, so that's why the wall, you may notice, is like this. So now we need to remove that and do it all over again.
Alright, perfect morning to begin work again, another weekend. It's September. I think September has to be the best month of the year to work here. No rain, the weather is nice and cool, but not too cold, so it's perfect. I just wanted to show you what we managed to accomplish last week. We were like literally rushing all day Sunday to get all these 3 walls stood up, braced and whatnot. We got them stood up, but we didn't actually finish the bracing. So what we ended up doing is we stayed an extra day. We spent a couple hours Monday and we braced all walls sufficiently so that they could stay stood up for like the entire week. So that's what you're seeing here. We're almost done with the walls, and we'll talk about lessons learned and whatnot shortly. I don't know if you remember, I mentioned before that my company had crazy things going on, like they'll work 24 hours a day for 2 months and they would get this work done. Yeah, it didn't happen. I don't know how many times I've seen this movie from many different companies. It always fails the exact same way. Something happens, it has to get delayed, but in the meantime, people are spending their weekends working like crazy people, and then it just gets delayed anyway. It all comes down to like naive promises from like management to customers. They don't even ask how long it takes to do things. So yeah. And on that note, I mentioned this also because we don't run efficient build that way. We run it based on quality. I don't know if you've ever heard of the triangle of quality, cost, and speed. So my company wants speed. So that means they end up spending a lot of time and money. They end up spending a lot of money, and they end up leaving on the background quality. Here at Efficient Build, we care about quality, second cost, and then time. So that's why we're a little slow, but we attempt to produce the most quality product possible. At the end of the day, this is our house, but even for the spec house in the futures that we build, we will focus on quality, not on speed. Speed kills. It also kills companies and projects. And then I also mentioned before that I was about to look that maybe I should look for a new job, and so I did, and I have a new offer now. I'm just going through the background checks and making sure that I'm not a criminal or something. So that should go well, no problem. I'll be kind of sad to leave my coworkers. To be honest, it's one of the better co-worker place I've ever been at. Too bad the environment is just crazy. I'm like mentally tired. I don't work as well as I used to. I just kind of like need a break and get my life back, to be honest. So we'll see. Like I said, I don't expect anything bad to happen on the background check. So I should be moving maybe someday. So who knows? If my coworkers ever see these videos, they will know they're amazing, and I'm sure they know why I will be leaving here shortly. This video will be released way after I have quit my job, so it'll just serve as reference. So yeah, let's get this roof started and finish up the episode, maybe put some sheathing around it, and hopefully we can get this roof and be done with this shed soon, at least drive in.
So here we have already begun the work of our next episode, which is going to be the roof. We already installed some of the rafters, but since we want to climb into the roof and be nailing and whatnot, we want the walls to be very sturdy, and they are not really locked into place until you brace them. So that's why right now we are doing the sheathing, at least for the first row, so they can be pretty stiff, and then we can work comfortably on the roof.
So we are improving our lessons learned. So I know we mentioned in the previous episode that it was a great idea to put the J-bolts and the thread rods in the foundation, and it is, at least for the J-bolts. The threaded rods are very, very tricky when it comes to precision placing, and we only come to find out now that we're doing framing. So for example, here we have our hold down, and this one worked perfectly. The problem with these hold downs is that the tolerance for insertion is very tight. So if you don't have the proper dimension for the different lumber, it can become very difficult. So let me show you how we made a mistake, or we just didn't know, it just is what it is. So for example, in this wall, you can see here our side plate. It would have continued all the way down, but obviously we have a problem right there because the hold down should have been, or will be there, except it would be in the place of this stud as well. So we had to do this kind of like little L shape to be able to place the hold down, but then we ended up with this problem in the main wall. In the process of building the shed, we have learned a couple techniques for lifting walls. Generally speaking, any wall, if it's light enough, it doesn't really matter the technique, you'll get it up and it'll be no problem. But this particular wall is extraordinarily heavy. We couldn't even lift it off the ground a couple inches. We actually used the car jack. So that said, I have mentioned the J-bolts and the thread rods we have placed in the foundation many times, and that's where the difficulty comes when putting them in place. Because they're sticking out, you actually have to lift the wall and then jump over them and then put them in place. And so this is what I mean. So you can see here the hole we made for the J-bolts. I also recommend you oversizing this slightly so that you have slack while lifting the wall. So that you have to lift the wall and then put them in place. And then here's the other technique we kind of learned as we went for the threaded rods that go to the hold downs. You can see we kind of like took out a little piece of the bottom plate right here. The reason for that is lifting the wall like even like 3, 4, 5 inches is extraordinarily difficult when the wall is heavy like this one. So we made that hole so that as the wall was lifting, the wall could slide in place, and then the threaded rod was holding it, and then it would just fall into the right location. The reason we can do that is because the hold down slash threaded rod, their purpose is to hold the walls down to the foundation, and that threaded rod goes to the foundation. The J-bolts, they hold the sill plate in place to the foundation. So that's why we're allowed to make that hole. And generally speaking, both sill plates and bottom plates, they end up being mostly nailers and sacrificial lambs. So yeah, those are a couple techniques we have learned. I don't know if they're like the proper technique, but we had to think about them on the fly. So we are done with this episode. As you can see, we have framed all the walls in the shed, all 4 walls.
All 4.
But they were priceless lessons that we learned for the main house, because we have to do this, but in bigger. So the first is big walls. You definitely need the wall jacks. It's very important to get the wall jacks. This wall doesn't look too big. In paper, everything looks smaller and easier and much faster. And as a lesson, you know, there's a big house back there. Yeah, that also looked very small in the paper.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was very heavy. We ended up using all sorts of jacks and wall jacks.
Yes, we underestimated it. We even thought like, oh, well, it has like this big opening for the door, you know, it's going to be light, but then it has the 2 headers, and it was just crazy. So I would say from lessons learned and the things that we appreciate the most, the tip of screwing some blocks here when you are lifting the wall, it was very good. It helps you to keep it in place and have some assurance that it's not going to go all the way out of where it should be. So that was a good one. The wall jacks were actually really useful. It's totally worth getting them. The one thing we were missing was another ladder. We only have one that it's large enough to lift that wall. It would have been nice to have another one, so Hector wouldn't have to be jumping from one ladder to the next one.
Another thing we learned is this probably only applies to us because we're like a couple, and but if you have a professional crew, they all recommend just building the walls in the ground and even putting sheathing on them. But for us, being them heavy, it probably works out a little bit better when we put blocking on them without putting the top plates, at least for this particular wall. That blocking ended up helping us. It ended up acting like a top plate. Once they were lifted, we were able to confirm our angles and lengths on the top plates were correct, considering this was our first angled roof.
Yeah.
And and it ended up working out pretty well. They were a piece of cake to lift and whatnot. So we might have ended up doing the same. We probably should have done the same for the big wall, and then probably trim down on the massive, heavy LVL headers and stuff.
And I would say another advantage of going this route and putting the top plates was that we could use clamps to align everything. So at the end, even if the studs had like some crowns or were a little bit twisted, having the clamps and when we nailed the top plate, it helped to keep everything aligned. So I think that's another good tip.
So yeah, I think that's all we got for this episode. As you can see, we are mixing and matching. We're working on the roof, we're working on the sheathing. The sheathing is helping us do a little bit of horizontal bracing and also. Yeah. Thank you for watching, and we hope you liked it. Please consider liking, subscribing, and hopefully we will see you in the next episode when we talk about the roof.
Thank you. Bye bye.